Welcome, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another installment of our band interview series. My name is Alex Mondragon, and I'm a second-year DMA student studying wind conducting here at the University of Illinois. I have the great pleasure today of being joined by Dr. Patrick Harlin. Dr. Harlin is a composer and researcher, and he's the composer of the work that the Illinois Wind Symphony will premiere at our December 4th concert titled The Time Traveler. Dr. Harlin, how are you today?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Thank you for taking the time. We're really appreciative. Can we start off today? Can you maybe just give the audience a little bit of background about yourself, your experience, things you'd just like them to know about you?
Yeah. So I am a composer for as long as I've played an instrument. I wanted to play piano. I saw my older sister playing and thought that sounds amazing. That looks really cool, but I couldn't read. I couldn't read words yet. And the teacher, their rule was like, oh, if you're going to be in my studio, you have to be able to read. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to write my own music and see where it goes. And so like my actual first experience as a composer was writing music for myself because I was so sort of like enamored with the piano as an instrument. Um, from that, I was actually thinking about this. It's like, what is my ensemble experience? Because, for those of you that are like paying attention, like piano is not the most frequently featured instrument in certainly orchestras, and it's in some band pieces, not some others. But I actually grew up playing in the jazz band, and I played in that from eighth grade all the way through college. I played under Chuck Israels, who's a famous bass player who toured with Bill Evans, and so that sort of like that sound world is like very much in my sort of background as a composer. And then beyond that, you know I love piano. That's my first love. Another thing I like to do is work with large forces and large ensembles. And I'm so excited to have the opportunity to write this piece for your ensemble and a number of other ensembles. And I'm thrilled that you guys are premiering it. So
Yeah.
it's a great pleasure for me to present music with you.
Great. It's been a great pleasure for us to rehearse it and to put it together and to be a part of the experience. So thank you for your music. Speaking of your music, let's pivot to that because I think that's why we're here today. Can you give us just a general overview of the piece? Kind of what were your ideas? What's it about? How long have you been stewing on this? How many movements? Anything you want to share generally?
Yeah, it's a lot to go into there. I've been thinking about this piece for a very long time. It started out actually pre-CBDNA in 2019 or something like that. I, got together with Dr. Michael Haithcock, the former symphony band conductor at Michigan, and we were working through like a project that would be cool. And I said, well, I want to do a time travel piece. Like I'm really interested in sort of writing something that visits the different eras that are, not only relevant to the music in the band repertoire and symphonic wind ensemble repertoire, but also just like concert music in general. And that sort of came about because I had written pieces, you know, pieces that explore subterranean Earth, pieces that explore, flight, and pieces that explore the stars, and I've sort of run out of like just in general places to go. And so in that sort of vein of having something to pay attention to in a piece of music, I wanted to send a theme to different eras and sort of explore what makes something sound like a time period. So that was really the genesis of the project. A lot of things happened in between CBDNA 2019, the pandemic, obviously, and then Dr. Haithcock retired, and then he said, I have this phenomenal conductor who is interested in the project and wants to take this on, and so I feel like so fortunate to have connected with Dr. Kevin Giraldi. So that's been great, and that's how this sort of came about.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So you mentioned briefly kind of the thematic element of this, which is that you write a theme and you
Mhm.
take it back through time.
Yeah,
Let's talk a little bit more about the time periods of the piece,
sure.
kind of how that worked out. So when the piece starts out, the title of the movement is Lost to Time. Can you talk a little bit about that movement and what you're trying to create, and then how we go from there?
Yeah, so the very first movement starts, more or less like with you sitting in your seat in the concert. It's meant to be sort of like a first person narrative. Like the concert is about the audience member, experiencing this. And when I'm sitting down in a concert, I always have this like when I'm really invested in a piece, sometimes like the time just flies. Or sometimes I'll be really invested in like 2.5 minutes goes by and I'm like, wow, I just experienced like 20 minutes of content but it's just because I'm so hyper focused. And the other thing can happen where you sit down and you hate the piece. And obviously I hope you won't sit down and hate my piece. But like it does happen. You sit down, you don't like the piece and the concert just drags on. You're like, I cannot wait for this piece to be over. And so I was just thinking in general about like different ways in which we experience time. But as I get older, the thing that and so many people that are a little bit older, like recognize is that time feels like it speeds up. And it feels like each year kind of like just sort of compresses a little bit. And so the kernel and the opening movement is just this idea of things going faster and faster and faster. And it really starts with the theme that you will hear throughout the entire piece. And when I say theme, I mean I'm taking like an 8 measure idea and I'm like doing whatever I want to it. Like lots of different things happen to that theme. But it's being sped up until we sort of hit sort of like this sort of critical mass, and then we're sent back to the second movement, which is 1808.
Yeah, really cool. Really, really cool. And for those of you who are going to join us that evening and hear the piece, it's a really effective and a really neat visual and conceptual idea that you'll get to experience through there. Talking about the other movements, you said the second is 1808. We've got there's some other time periods. We have 1808, we have 1957, 1969, all the way back to 1101. I won't spoil them all, but there are more.
You spoil away.
Perhaps we will. We'll see.
Yeah.
Just based on those, like maybe think about your favorite one or two, or the ones that you were most excited about, or that were the most salient for you. What were the kind of most inspirational pieces that made you say, I have to pick this time period. I have to do this. Is there one or two?
Well, I had to do the Grand Partita. I had to do 1781. Like that one was, that's the Mozart. It's the, seminal wind ensemble work. Like very important for me to visit that time frame. And actually the other one that I will say, the fourth movement, which is in the 1960s, 1969 in Fever Dream, that one was just, that was just very fun to write.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. And then the other one is the sort of the Hildegard movement, which is all the way back to 1101. It was really, really fun for me to sort of not be constrained to like, well, this is how I'm supposed to sound necessarily. This is, and also like, I want to say I wasn't trying to replicate the era and be like sounding like Hildegard. Like that's not the intent either. It's sort of like you are like a time spy. You're sent back and you're trying to fit into the era, but you're not maybe doing the best job of it. So each of those were fun in their own right. The 1960s, which is the fourth movement, I was really thinking about Quincy Jones. He has this amazing album. I'm going to blank on it. It's like Big Band Bossa Nova or something like that. And if you've seen Austin Powers, you've heard the one track, the title track from that. Everyone, it sounds kind of like a parody, but it's actually just amazing orchestration. And most people don't know that Quincy Jones also studied with Nadia Boulanger, and is like this. I mean, if you know him, you know that he's an incredible producer. And but I knew him first and foremost through his large ensemble, like big band music. And so that was a really fun one to think about. And then also to consider that there is no bigger band than the wind ensemble. Like you have all of the instruments. So that was a lot of fun. The 1101, which is the movement that happened. Well, I guess I can go in order after that, because the Grand Partita movement that's called Unpartita, it's really an amuse-bouche. It's very short, and it was very challenging to write. Of all of the things in the entire piece, that was probably the most, for me as a composer, hard to get into. I think what you realize and what I intuitively knew, but also like explicitly now, like totally appreciate even more than I did, is that you can't write, like if you try to emulate Mozart, you just end up sounding like bad Mozart. Like there's no, in my opinion, I mean, you can sort of like come up with things that sound similar to it, but he's a maximalist in terms of like what he's been able to do with the tools that he has and how he deploys them. They're just maximally deployed in what he writes. And so in thinking of sending this theme, which you hear in the very beginning of the music, to the era of the Grand Partita, it became very challenging because then it's just sounding like a lesser version of the Grand Partita. So that one was also actually ultimately a ton of fun to write because I wrote it with saxophones as like uninvited guests at the grand party, this big party that's happening, or big sound. And the inside joke, or the saxophone did not exist at that time in the 1780s. So that, very clearly should not be there, cannot be there. And they're playing definitely like out of sync stylistically with what's happening in that era. And then the other one that I'm happy to talk about any of them, but the Hildegard movement was really fun. And that was probably ultimately the easiest one to write for some reason. And it's what I do with the theme in that is I take a center point and the music reflects outward from that. So if one voice goes up, another voice balances by going down the opposite direction. And the whole thing balances out like this as it goes along. And it's also very sort of like call and response, or you have like groups of instruments playing and then responding to that. And so that was just fun and different than how I would think about writing, and it, being able to sort of send something back to an era allowed me to do that in a way that I wouldn't necessarily easily be able to justify in other pieces that I write.
Yeah. Speaking to just all of those points, it's really cool to listen. I think this is the type of piece you can put in front of somebody with no context and they would understand that they're moving through these different time periods. Like I think you found a way to capture the sound and the character of these time periods in a way that I could play the Hildegard movement and say, what does this sound like? And they could say, that sounds like music of Hildegard von Bingen. Like we know that we've gone to this time period. Or I could play Fever Dream and they go, that sounds like a groovy 60s, 70s kind of, bossa nova tune. And so I think it's really cool that you've captured that sound world in each of these movements. And it's really, I think, engaging to hear it and know that something new is coming and we're going to move here soon. But
yeah, well, thank you. Yeah.
Of course,
that makes me feel good as a composer. I always try to, you don't always stick the landing, but the goal is there. So that's
I think this time, I think you did stick the landing. I think it's a really wonderful piece, and I'm excited for people to join us and hear it. Before we spend too much time discussing, I just have one final question for you, and that's if you have anything that you hope an audience member will listen for or take away from hearing the premiere performance. Is there anything you want to kind of guide their ears to for that performance?
Well, okay, so as a listener, the biggest thing is that for a majority of the piece, the theme is present somewhere in what you're hearing. And when I say like the Hildegard thing, I'm presenting the theme in sort of like a mirrored way, but I might be fragmenting the theme and sort of sequencing it, like where an idea like moves up or down. So the theme is almost always present, and I would really encourage people to listen through if they want to listen in that way. If they want to just sit and enjoy the beautiful sounds of the wind ensemble, that's great too. From like a sort of like a musical philosophical level, I think that what the band world does as a sort of just culturally, where they commission so much new music, is such a gift to culture, to composers, to musicians present, and to future musicians. And so like, what I wanted to do is highlight how much amazing music there is and how connected that music is ultimately. You can have a theme that works in all of these different eras. I will say strategically or compositionally, I made the theme a little bit it's not a super unique thing. I don't know how to say it in like a polite way. It has to be flexible. Like there's not, the theme is, by the end of the piece, you'll know the theme, or hopefully, but it has to be flexible a little bit. So there's that sort of part of composing it that comes into play too. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, awesome. I think I'm really excited to be part of this whole experience, and I think it's gonna be really well received. I really hope that we can get a bunch of people in the hall that evening for the performance to hear it.
Yeah, and I should say I will be there, and
Yeah,
I'm happy to talk to anyone at intermission or afterwards.
yeah.
Well, actually afterwards because it ends the concert. But yeah, I'm happy to connect with anyone. Yeah.
And from the ensemble perspective, I know that we are all really looking forward to having you join us and be there and get to meet you, from students and to faculty to all of that. So really, really looking forward to that. For those of you watching, the concert is Wednesday, December 4th at 7:30 p.m. in the Krannert Center for the Performing Arts in the Foellinger Great Hall. Dr. Harlin, thank you so much for making some time today to join me. Looking forward to having you with us here after the holiday, and thank you again. Have a great
Yeah,
one.
thank you. We'll see you on Wednesday, December 4th.
See you then.
Yeah.